Hello, and welcome back to the Alexander Society. This podcast is now gay, and you're gay for listening to it.
Happy Pride.
Happy Pride, everyone. Congratulations, you're all gay.
But just like me, you don't truly count.
That's not fair. I think you count. I'm your host, professional brick thrower, Derek. Joined by my friend and co-host, drunkenly using a parking meter as a battering ram, Tim. How are we doing today, Tim?
Pretty fucking good. I got my parking meter right beside me.
Oh, hell yes. Oh, we're going to beat so many cops with that parking meter. Oh my god.
Yes. That's one of my favorite things from like makeshift weapons in like zombie flicks and stuff like that is like a broken like either like stop sign or parking meter, stuff like that, concreted in the ground that you've ripped off and just you're going medieval on zombies or whoever you're beating the fuck out of. That's one of my favorite like improvised weapons.
Depending on how well it's concreted into the ground, you could use either end.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, Derek, how are you doing tonight on this gay evening?
Oh, it's
on this first of Pride.
The whole damn month is gay, and we are absolutely here for it. Happy Pride, everybody! Glad you're all here with us. I'm doing pretty all right. It's just now occurring to me that I'm going to be married during Pride Month.
That's not very gay of you, sir.
Yeah, marrying a woman during Pride Month.
How could thee?
The straightest thing I could possibly do. God, I'm such an asshole. I'm a bad ally. Everybody point and laugh in the comments. Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. Just high on spirits, low on cash, getting ready for this wedding.
I'm always short on cash, but I feel it.
How you doing, Tim?
I'm doing pretty good. As we were doing our normal debriefing of everyone's lives, even though I am not a fan of this beer, I'm already about halfway through it, so...
Yeah, well, it's alcohol.
If that speaks to anything on my first of Pride.
Yeah, I think you got some other stuff going on for what it's worth. So, Tim, who do you want to go first? You want to tell us what you're drinking?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and let the people know. I thought this sounded amazing, and it starts off amazing. It's just the afterbite I'm not really a fan of. It is La Cashmere 2022 5th Anniversary Ale by Angry Scotsman, and I am not going to stop and try and have us correct my pronunciation on any of that or what type of beer it is I'm about to read out, so we're just going to roll past it. It's a Belgian-style Stuyssen Ale brewed with California Cabernet grape must in a secondary fermentation. It is 14.6 alcohol by volume, 30 IBUs.
Oh, that's exciting.
And then I'm going to hate myself further tonight. I'm going to be drinking Deep Eddy's Sweet Tea Vodka. It's a 35%.
Yeah, that's the actual, like the only good sweet tea liquor that I've ever tried.
I will be trying it and probably judging you heavily for it.
Well, it's the only one I've had that actually tastes like real brewed.
Fair enough.
So imagine just actual tea mixed with vodka.
Now, my good friend who is sullying his ally status by getting married in Pride Month, what are you drinking tonight?
Oh, I'm low on cash right now, so I'm kind of just mixing and matching what I've already got, just hanging around the house right now, so...
You're doing what I did, just so you know, audience, we have an episode we already recorded covering Killdozer, which, if I had convinced Derek to let me do 2 mystery dockets in a row instead of 2 Alexander articles in a row, we would have beaten Lore Lodge to an episode on the Killdozer. But, hey-ho.
Yeah, so for my shots, I pulled out the Mount Gay Barbados rum. It's the Eclipse Heritage brand, 40%, one of the best rums that I've ever had. I keep coming back to it. It's one of those, I mention it every time, but I have very tender affections for this rum. It's fantastic. And for my sippers, I've just got a kind of hodgepodge of a bunch of different stuff I had in my fridge. First off, I'm going to be pulling out the last pint of that Samuel Smith's I got from my good friend Tim for Christmas. And, oh boy, I almost feel bad about all of the bad things that I've ever said about the British.
No, you don't.
I said almost.
That almost is the size of a fucking trench.
Listen, they make good beer in York, so I'll give them credit for that. So besides that, I've got a couple bottles of Raw and Sons from Fort Worth. They're Adios Pantalones, the cerveza with beer, and they're the cerveza with lemon and lime. And then I also have one bottle of Rusty Kiltpin left from Angry Scotsman, which is like Angry Scotsman, my favorite brewery. And this is like their signature thing they sell the most of. It's really good. It's really good. It's a Scottish-style ale.
Real quick, let's go ahead and get into the rules. What is our first rule, Derek?
Rule number 1. Anytime cops are bastards, we are going to take a sip.
Rule number 2. Anytime the mafia are bastards, 3 sips.
Which is surprising. They came up an awful lot in this story, and I wasn't expecting it.
Interesting. I think this is the first time we've done a mob episode. Like, mob-involved episode.
Yeah, there's no specific characters that come up that are in the mob, but they're there. And then rule number 3. Anytime our good friend Marsha does something cool, what are we going to do, Tim?
We're going to take a happy gay little shot.
Happy gay little shot. Speaking of happy gay little shots, Prost. All right, so with that, Tim, what do you know about Stonewall?
So I know that nothing about the specific event, but I know Pride started with a bunch of riots, and that Stonewall is a riot. So, like, I knew of Stonewall, but not specifically Stonewall. I knew the idea of Stonewall.
Yeah, Stonewall, the Stonewall riot was, it's when people realized that, it's when the American people realized that there were a lot of gay people, and they were very pissed off.
I mean, if you deprive any group of people of their rights for long enough, they're going to get mad and viva la revolution.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened at Stonewall. Decades of resentment mixed with the right conditions made an explosive effect that caused deep societal changes, and that's what we're going to be talking about here. It was not. I need to make it clear: Stonewall was not the beginning of the gay rights movement. It wasn't even like it. It was the moment when the gay rights movement took a very public and very militant turn.
Everything I know about gay rights prior to, like, the movement that kind of brought it forward, like, I'm not really sure on the year or whatever, but I know, like, there was a movement that led to this, the riots and all that. Like, and from what I know about history, it was very much suppressed to the point, like, I'm not surprised it got to that level that it, like, they decided, like, yeah, no, fuck you, we riot.
Yeah, so we'll explain all of this in due time. To understand the chain of events leading up to what would eventually become Stonewall, you got to understand what was going on in the United States, specifically post-World War II, because World War II really just changed everything. Even in the United States, where we didn't get the brunt of the full force of the transformative power of World War II, but it still affected us very deeply. And we need to go back all the way to the early 1950s, specifically during the Red Scare. Because post-World War II, the U.S. was in a bit of a cultural limbo, if you will. The horrors of war had opened many American people up to the idea that the U.S. really had to kind of fundamentally change. And, of course, there had been people always saying that the United States had to fundamentally change, but they had all been murdered and deported about 2 decades before. So a lot of people got the idea that the United States had to start making changes because World War II had opened up a lot of truths about the human psyche that most people weren't really happy to find out. And as always happens, this wave of reform-minded idealism was paired with a parallel reactionary sort of movement. They were also deeply affected by, like, the horrors of the Second World War, but they took a different direction with it, thinking that the United States had been a little too changey in the past few decades, and if we wanted to avoid another big thing like World War II, we had to entrench really hard into our, like, traditional values. And, you know, at the time, I could see, like, the initial thought is like, oh, like, our traditional concepts of, like individual self-reliance and democratic mandate and rule of law but with a light hand, those sorts of ideals and concepts, which are bad in theory, No, they actually meant stuff like criminalizing gay people and blacklisting suspected communists from getting jobs and shit like that. Trying to break up unions, that kind of traditionalism, not like good kind of traditionalism.
I mean, I'm not fucking surprised.
It's not surprising, no, because anytime somebody says traditionalism and they start talking about like traditions, they're not talking about like
good traditions.
The few good things we can actually find in like the American experiment, which is like the concept of like the concepts of like individual liberty and the Bill of Rights, things like that. Those are all really good things. They always mean stuff that like never really actually were a big deal in the past, like people being really pissed off at gay people and banning abortion and shit like that. It's their traditions. The traditions they want to preserve are always shit that like 100 years ago nobody gave a shit about.
Well, of course.
Yeah. Well, not to say that people didn't give a shit about like that people weren't like persecuting gay people like 100 years ago, but like it didn't have like the moral panic sort of thing that it started to get in like the 1950s.
It wasn't because they weren't doing it because like, oh, think of the children. They were in a mindset at the time. They didn't prosecute it the same way. It was just difference is the real reason why before it was. And then when the moral panic sets in, they're like, well, of course, like this is wrong. This is evil when it's a moral panic situation.
Yeah, it went from like a still admittedly bad thing of like, being gay is weird, keep it away from me, but like not really doing anything about it, to you hit the 1950s, they're like, get the cops on them, arrest them, get them out of the public light, harass them until they no longer want to be alive.
Essentially kill them.
Yeah, it is public murder of a persecuted minority, just with extra steps. They're taking the long route to just...
It is ostracize them until they either kill themselves or they get killed.
Yeah, they don't really care where the gay people go as long as they're not out in public.
Well, that's the thing. They actively just don't give a shit about other people to the point where, like, if they die, they die. So be it. Kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So... the first sort of modern-style wave of anti-LGBT repression was concurrent with the Red Scare in the 1950s. And it was during that time, hundreds of public figures and government employees were being interrogated and blacklisted for being, like, suspected communists. You had the House of an American Activities Committee, House of American...
The McCarthyism pisses me off so much.
McCarthyism, yeah. Yeah, which, fun fact, what's really interesting is the investigative section of the House Un-American Activities Committee were headed up by Representative Joseph McCarthy and by his lawyer, Roy Cohn. Have you ever heard that name before, Roy Cohn?
Cohn sounds familiar, but not Roy Cohn.
So, hold on. Let me get to this next part, and then I'll tell you why they're a really weird story. So, sometime along the way, during the Red Scare, during the 1950s McCarthyism, they started to do the same thing with suspected gays, suspected homosexuals, because they saw being gay as not just like an inherent degeneracy, but as heavily associated with communism. They thought that gay people, at the very least, were susceptible to blackmail by communist spies. And at the most, were gay because they were influenced by communist ideas. Yeah, so you had, alongside the Red Scare, you also had this parallel persecution going on. It was called the Lavender Scare, which they were doing basically the same thing that they were doing to suspected communists, except they were doing it to suspected gays. Because this, just like what happened with the Red Scare, the Lavender Scare it kind of sparked off a moral panic all throughout the country, and it kind of spilled out from the House Un-American Activities Committee into, like, the public sphere and the private sphere. So, like, a bunch of businesses, a bunch of universities, a bunch of, local governments started doing similar sort of purges and witch hunts on, like, suspected homosexuals. There started being like these public fears that like there were gay people infiltrating like universities and corporate like like businesses in order to like corrupt America with like their degeneracy from within, and it led to like this big string of it. A lot of like gay people who tried to be like moderately sort of open ended up just being unemployable. They couldn't hold a job anymore. That was, you had a very, very rapid decline in the quality of life for your average gay person, just out of nowhere.
Sounds about white.
Yeah, pretty much. And eventually, by like the mid 1950s, there were laws in most states that basically said that businesses are legally allowed to discriminate based on sexual orientation. If you're suspected to be gay, you could be denied a job. If you were and it wasn't just like employment; it was also like being able to get loans, being able to rent in certain properties, and even just like being able to enter certain businesses. Business owners could just say, "Nope, you're gay. You're not allowed to shop here," and like, there's nothing you could do about it because they're legally allowed to. So naturally, there was like, gay people were not going to take this lying down.
No one should take that lying down.
Now, in 1953, a group was formed in the living room of a notable communist activist named Harry Hay, who was a early gay rights activist and a longtime like labor organizer. Out of his living room, a group of activists formed the first like major gay rights activist organization in American history. It was called the Mattachine Society.
Fuck yeah! Okay.
And soon after, a group of lesbians in San Francisco formed their own organization based off of the Mattachine Society called the Daughters of Bilitis.
What is Bilitis a reference to?
I have no fucking idea.
I assumed you would know your shit. Hacking a fraud, Derek. Hacking a fraud.
Well, these names were deliberately chosen because the basic ideology behind these groups was they were going to be as respectable and respectful and unobjectionable as humanly possible in order to demonstrate to like the American public that like gay people can be normal too, which, there's a logic to it, but like also,
duh,
they're still not going to accept you. They're still not. They don't care if you dress respectably and are well educated. They're still not going to give you a job if you say you're gay. It's just not going to happen. They're going to be more suspicious of you.
The amount of times I go through history and see people marginalized and I want to turn into fucking Homer Simpson.
Can you explain that to me real quick?
I want to go back in time and just wring their fucking neck like Homer does to Bart.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant like drink yourself into a stupor and pass out while your wife looks on disappointed.
That works too.
So yeah, that was basically like, keep that in mind. That's what gay activism and these early groups were referred to. I'm going to get this out of the way now. There's going to be a lot of terms I'm going to use in this that are going to sound really dated, and the only reason I'm using them is because these are the
terms that they went by rather than
this is what they used themselves, and it helps kind of clarify like what kind of how they saw themselves and how they interpreted their own identity at the time. So
don't hate me, this is just what they used kind of thing.
Yeah, and they're not necessarily like bad, like derogatory. They're just like dated. But these early groups, like the Mattachine Society and the Daughters of Bilitis, they referred to themselves as homophile organizations. That's how they described themselves and their own sexuality. Were homophile, and which linguistically makes sense. Said out loud,
sounds weird.
Yeah. But yeah, so you keep in mind like kind of the ideology of like these early groups. Like their main priority was like they focused on specifically like employment discrimination, and especially a lot of them were kind of like wealthier, sort of upper, maybe not even upper class, but like comfortably middle class, but were just frustrated at not being able to get like government jobs and things like that. That was like their main sort of area of activism. And a lot of these early groups also like early on in the gay rights like activist period, you got the emergence of a lot of like alternative lifestyles, we'll say, like transvestite culture and just like drag queen culture, things like that. That were kind of on the domain of like the poorer working class gay community.
Here, real quick, I want to derail you, but I think this is actually relevant to the episode. I really am like weirded out by the evangelicals' fetishization of drag. Like, I get it; it can be like a sexual thing, but most of the time, drag's just fun, whatever, goof off for the queer community. And
yeah,
the amount of times that the clutching my pearls group is the best way I can put it, turn that into it has to be sexual, it has to be pushing your lifestyle on people, really pisses me off.
Yeah, pearls clutched in one hand, a gun in the other hand, and
that's the type of people. It just disgusts me how anything anyone does for fun turns into something sexual, unfortunately. To the clutching your pearls kind of people.
Yeah, and I know exactly what you're talking about, because I vaguely knew what drag was, like, pretty young, and it, like, throughout most of my life, up until, like, the last couple years, it never even occurred to me to think of drag as, like, a sexual thing.
Yeah, I would have never, if you had introduced young Tim to it, like, just drag itself, instead of hearing, like, about the clutching the pearls around it, I probably like, what? What do you mean that's sexual?
Yeah, to me, it's always been presented as like either a form of self-expression or like a performance art.
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's a performance art. And it pisses me off that people like will whittle it down to that. Because they've never had a problem with, back in the day, they were super sexist, so they didn't really let women perform, so we had to have cross-dressers. That seems to not bother them one bit, but drag is, oh my god!
Yeah, you want to know something really interesting that I actually came across while I was doing research for this one? A lot of early drag culture actually came from veterans of World War II.
Interesting.
Because there is a long tradition in the U.S. Army of soldiers passing the time by dressing up as women and putting on shows. And so a lot of gay veterans of World War II came back home with that practice and started like introducing it to gay communities back in the States. Like there are like really like pretty well known stories of guys like even going as far back as like the Civil War. Like Ulysses S. Grant was made fun of a lot because there was a story about him doing drag while he was stationed out west early in his career.
I'll end my thoughts here. I hate reductionism in like a lot of these things that pearl clutchers do, because that's what they're doing, is they're reducing it down to a small, narrow part of it. And I'm just like, yes, I know I'm guilty of doing this on other stuff. It just feels like they do it on things that are like, just for like, the best way I can put it is they're doing it in a way that like is hurting niche communities that can barely survive that shit.
Yeah. So yeah, just kind of keep in mind, a lot of these early gay rights groups are very sort of middle class oriented. They're not really inclusive of transvestite and drag queen and hustler culture and stuff like that are kind of like more in like the poor working class sort of gay community, which they kind of look down on because they kind of see it as like we're trying to convince straight people that we can be normal, not that we're doing all of this stuff. This stuff is just going to scare them away.
Us being this is normal, not everyone doing it is normal, is the fundamental I wouldn't say miscommunication, because it's intentionally misunderstanding it that happens.
That's all well and good. And then we get the 1960s. Tim, can you tell me what happened with activist groups in the 1960s?
It's just everyone was like, I want my goddamn rights. I'm tired of this shit.
Oh, yeah. Oh, boy, let me tell you. Oh, boy, you had the anti-war movement in response to Vietnam, which got really fucking militant. You had the civil rights movement and the corresponding Black Power movement, which got really fucking militant. You had the reform, like the progressive reform movement, kind of like the new left sort of socialist and communist labor movements, which got really fucking militant, especially on like campuses. And so a lot of the gay rights movement also kind of followed suit. A lot of gay rights activists kind of started getting involved with the new.
I wonder why.
Yeah, and so the new left started becoming like a sort of like anywhere you went in the new left, you kind of got like this sort of nascent, blossoming sort of gay rights, like more sexually inclusive culture kind of developing in like the progressive movement. And you saw a lot of gay rights groups that started coming out in support of like the Black Panthers and of like anti-war movements they were there. They were entering this sort of milieu of like sort of the blossoming radicalism. And it wasn't just, like I mentioned before, it wasn't just like gay and lesbian people. It was also the blossoming sort of gender non-conforming.
That's really, like, modernly, in my opinion, where it kind of started, is the gay rights movement in that time, is where the gender non-conforming stuff started. And I say this as someone who unfortunately is almost autistically focused on that a little bit. Conforming to gender stereotypes is very toxic and unhealthy for our mental health. It's something we need to break down the social stigma around.
Yeah. It's why I don't really like. I stopped feeling self-conscious about like crossing my legs when I sit because it's just comfortable.
Yeah. That's the weird bullshit. Like, I am not saying you can't be proud of masculinity, but a lot of things that people like to, the pearl clutchers or the people who boast like, I'm a masculine, manly man, are focused on as masculine traits are just, they're toxic and it's bullshit. You can be proud of your masculinity, but you have to do it in a healthy way, and it has to be in a way that's not shitty. Like a lot of people tend to take their masculinity. Yeah.
To any women or to any like queer people who are listening right now, if you have any like cis straight male friends who are self-conscious enough to kind of understand like
our own weird plight in the world, because like,
yeah, pick their brain, because you're going to find out some fascinating stuff about the way our brains work. It's really kind of fucked up.
Yep. Like,
anyways, so yeah, you got early gender non-conforming, like transvestite, and I'm going to say transvestite a lot. It's going to come up a lot.
It's an outdated term, but it's what they used.
Yeah, it's how they describe themselves. Like, one of the major figures we're going to talk about in this episode, I'd kind of call her like the main character. Her name is Marsha P. Johnson. And I'm even going to use she, her pronouns because that's what she used. But she never described herself as like a trans woman or anything like that. She always described herself as a gay man who is also a crossdresser, a transvestite.
See, that's another thing that's kind of weird that we kind of evolved from. Transvestite used to mean more like drag queen back in the day, rather than the term that we use today, trans, the trans umbrella, where you have transitioned your gender, which is now more associated with that. Honestly, it's now a slur outside of this context when we're talking historically against those who have transitioned.
Yeah, and like back then, like Marsha ended up dying, and she died. She passed away in 1992, and even by that point, like transgender hadn't really become like a big.
I think that didn't really, like, the current culture that we're in right now didn't really start till maybe the late 2000s, if not the mid 2010s.
Yeah, but some of her fellow activists and organizers in like the transvestite community, who ended up outliving her, would later go on to kind of describe themselves as transgender as well.
I feel like if she got to our modern culture, she would have described herself as trans rather than the outdated label. But sadly, we don't know that for sure.
Yeah, we're not going to be sure.
Just everything you've told me, obviously. I don't have the research.
Yeah, so when I'm describing like in the context of this story, anytime I bring up a name or I describe anybody, I'm going to use the pronouns that they use for themselves, and I'm going to describe them as they would have described themselves, because I think that's a respectful thing to do.
That's minor tangent back to the pearl clutching thing. I get people like, well, you're not a real one. Who fucking cares if you don't believe them? Have at least a little human decency, like we all socially pretend like, hey, I'm doing good today, even though you can tell I'm not. I'm fine having a good day or like living the dream. Just like even like I think it's really shitty of someone not to embrace someone's gender, but like at least have the social decency to just like go along with it, you know?
Yeah, here's the thing about them is that, like, from what I've seen, it genuinely takes, like, actual effort for them to not refer to trans people by their preferred pronouns. Like, they actually have to make an effort to do it.
That's what I'm getting at. Like, it's an actual effort to... You're going out of your way to be a TERF.
Yeah, like, they're...
I know TERF is specifically a feminist, but, like, I like to use it against any anti-trans person. I know that's not technically correct, but I don't care.
Yeah, and like most transphobes, like unless they're just really just deeply depraved, just lacking any like basic sense of human emotion or decency, like have just had that either just never had it in the first place or have had it stripped from them. Most conservatives and most transphobes have like a basic sort of concept of like how to be polite in conversation. And they have to like deliberately put in effort to override that basic instinct in order to misgender trans people. Like there's a clip of there's a clip of Ben Shapiro referring to repeatedly, like throughout his show, referring to a trans woman he was talking about using she/her pronouns, and then having to consciously correct himself to say he to deliberately.
Because they can always tell, can't they, Derek?
They can't even tell when they know. They can't even tell somebody's trans when they know they're trans. They're. Anyways, let's try to stay on track here. Yeah.
Let's get off our soapbox because we've talked enough shit on people who are anti-LGBTQ+. Let's start uplifting our LGBTQ history.
Yeah, so transvestite culture, what would eventually evolve into like modern transgender culture, identity, that kind of thing. It first sort of entered. It was always like a very like working class, like the respectable gaze of like the middle class of like the Mattachine society and things like that. They didn't like this portion of the gay movement because they saw it as like very vulgar and very like regressive towards like the goals they were aiming for because they thought it made them look bad. But they were always there. They were always a very active part of it, and they first really entered like They were like the first wave of militancy within the gay rights movement. Like it because they were the ones who were suffering the worst from discrimination because they were the ones who were like the most obvious out in public queer.
Well, yeah, exactly. So
the first sort of like hint at that, like the role that they would play in the militancy of the gay rights movement came. The first big one was in 1966. Police raided a restaurant in San Francisco called Compton's Cafeteria and arrested several transvestites. And then in the
go ahead and finish this part of the story, but we do need a sip.
Yeah, so in the ensuing scuffle, they tried to resist their arrest, but in the ensuing scuffle, other patrons began to throw dishes and glassware at the cops, and it blew up into like
all cops are bastards.
All cops are bastards, yeah. And it blew up into like this full-blown riot where they ended up like trashing the restaurant, breaking out the windows, attacking, and the cops called for reinforcements. They ended up attacking those cops. It was relatively small. The reinforcements showed up, and the people and the rioters also attacked the reinforcing cops. And so that it was a relatively small thing, but it was a big deal because like most people didn't see transvestites, drag queens, street queens, hustlers. They were somebody who got beat up by cops. They weren't people who beat up cops. And so the idea of the roles being reversed was kind of it was scandalous. Kind of got the straights sort of nerves on end a little bit. So now let's talk about the location of our topic today, which is Greenwich Village. Greenwich Village is in New York City. It's a neighborhood in New York City, and it has a long history as a neighborhood for outcasts of society. It's kind of to gay and trans people what Compton or not Compton, what Harlem was for black people. They had very, very similar histories, but with different groups. And the repression of the 1950s made it a neighborhood, made it even like a more prominent safe zone, both for radicals and for queer people. It was a very important sort of hotspot for like a lot of the radical artistic movements. You got like a lot of the big folk singers of the 1960s that were really involved in the anti-war movement. Guys like Bob Dylan. Oh shit, what was her name? Oh god, she performed it. No. Like folk singers. A bunch of like the real big names in like the anti-war movement, especially like the artists, like the poets and the folk singers. A lot of the people that performed at Woodstock would end up living in Greenwich Village at some point in their life, and so it so naturally it had a lot of gay people, and it had a lot of specifically working class gay people. So it had a very prominent transvestite culture. There were also a lot of like, it's always been a huge problem when a teenager comes out to their parents as being gay, or when their parents find out that they're gay, they get kicked out and they become homeless. And so a big part of Greenwich Village's culture was kind of made up of like these communities of homeless gay teenage boys. They were a big part of the culture. They were also some of the most early militant gay rights activists. They weren't necessarily like super ideological. They just knew they were gay and they hated cops, and that kind of was enough sometimes. And so naturally, such a big congregation of openly gay people was not sitting well with the well-to-do of New York high society, and it led to a lot of repression campaigns against Greenwich Village.
Because they love repressing groups because they think that's how they can do it.
Yeah. A big part of these campaigns was specifically targeting bars where LGBT people would congregate. They would do stuff like send in like police raids, revoke liquor license, things like that. And so at some point you had like a decent sized community of people of just like regular business owners, sometimes gay, sometimes not, that would open up like gay bars, trying to make a living by serving the needs of the local community. And but they were always inevitably raided and harassed out of existence by police. And so eventually it actually got to the point where the only way that you could operate a gay bar in New York City, especially in Greenwich Village, was if you were able to bribe and pay off the police.
As always, the cops are taking bribes most of the time. It happens way too often.
Yeah. The only group of people that were able to consistently do that were the mob. And so virtually all of the gay bars in Greenwich Village were owned by the mafia, including the Stonewall Inn. And do you know anything about the culture of the mafia?
I know a pop culture version of it. I don't know how accurate that is.
They're not traditionally conservative, but they are they do have a conservative worldview.
They have their structure is very conservative, but they will participate in anything that makes them money.
Yes, yeah, they're not American conservative, but they are very hierarchical, very patriarchal. A lot of them are very religious, like specifically the mob that owned the Stonewall Inn was the Sicilian. It was the Sicilian mafia, and they're very devout Catholics. Like, they don't like gay people, and so they ran these gay bars because they knew they could make money off of it. But they squeezed the gay community for every drop of blood that they could get out of them. They would extremely overcharge on drinks. It became like cost prohibitive for most gay people to go to these bars because they just couldn't afford to drink. It cost so much. And the drinks that you did get, even if you could afford it, always watered down. Always watered down. A lot of these places weren't up to codes because they could just bribe the zoning authority, the city council, to just ignore like building code violations, and so a lot of them didn't have like any fire exits. A lot of them didn't have running water. A lot of them were just, frankly, kind of shitholes. But they stayed in business because they were the only shitholes that the gay people had to be themselves out in public.
I am back, and I would like to introduce you to my other beer. It is also so happens to be a local brewery, which I didn't even intend when I picked it out, but as I was going to the counter, I was like, oh, that's local too! It is Twisted Spike Brewing Co. Cherry Vanilla Tart.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's an OKC brewery. 2016 is when they were established. It's a cherry sour. It's a 4.0. I thought, like, the can is also really cute. Like, it's just cute.
That sounds so good, though. Long and short of it, the only gay bars that were able to operate in New York City during this time were gay bars that were owned by people who hated gay people.
Yay!
Yeah, not a great situation, and it just made their lives that much more difficult because the only safe places they could be themselves out in public were just actual shitholes. One of the most prominent gay bars in Greenwich Village, it was on Christopher Street, and it was called the Stonewall Inn. The Stonewall Inn was a shithole, to be completely frank. It had no running water, it had no functioning plumbing, and it was an active front for drug smuggling.
Love it.
It was also, however, the only gay bar in the city that allowed dancing.
The fuck?
Yeah, it's a lot of...
That's synonymous with a gay bar. There's always dancing.
Yeah, there's always... unless they're owned by the mafia. Remember who's running these things.
Goddamn mob doesn't know how to have a good time.
Yeah, and so because it was the only one that was willing to let people dance, it was the most popular gay bar in the city. It attracted people from all around town, rich, poor, all different races, even lesbians. A lot of lesbians went to this bar as well.
So that's the thing about gay bars that I didn't understand until, like, unfortunately, fairly recently. I thought gay bars really meant, like, LGBTQ plus in general, but there's, like, it's like straight bars, I guess. It can have very niche crowds within, even if it's from a niche crowd already, that I didn't truly understand.
Yeah, because a lot of gay bars, functionally, it was, in a lot of cases, the function was, like, because it was usually, like, the only place to find hookups, and so, like, it tended to attract gay men specifically because that it's just really hard for a guy to find a hookup with another guy outside of a bar. Lesbians, it's still really difficult, but, like, oh my god. So let's set the scene for what's about to happen. It's the night of Friday, June 27th, 1969. It was a normal night of operation at the Stonewall Inn. Unbeknownst to both patrons and employees at the club, there were 4 undercover police officers from, and bear with me, the name of this fucking police unit, the NYPD Public Morals Squad. It's the most Orwellian fucking shit I've ever heard in my life. Orwell couldn't come up with a name like that.
No. Excuse me. No, he could not. For the audience at home, my eye just uncontrollably twitched out of pure anger and rage. Because that should not be a sentence that ever comes out of anyone's mouth about history.
That is incredible that it's so on the nose. This was after 1984 had already become like an international bestseller.
I fundamentally think you're misunderstanding the level of rage I am filled with right now, Derek.
So, yeah, there were 4 undercover cops with the NYPD Public Morals Squad blended into the crowd of about 200 patrons. They were there to collect evidence of impropriety and public lewdness. Which is, that's a very formal way of saying they saw people in drag and they saw boys holding hands.
Scandalous!
So, once they had their evidence collected, Late in the evening, they gave the signal, and at 1:20 a.m. on Saturday, June 28th, 8 cops from the Public Morals Squad, reinforced by a bunch more officers from the 6th Precinct, burst through the front door and yelled, "Police, we're taking this place." The employees quickly flipped off the black lights and turned on the regular lights, which was the signal to the patrons that the raid was happening. And immediately all of the drag queens, the street queens, the transvestites, all of them immediately beelined for the side doors and to the windows, but all of them had already been blocked off by police, and so they weren't able to get away.
Pigs!
So usually the way that a raid like this went was that all of the patrons would be made to line up and would be told to present their IDs. If someone didn't have an ID, they would be arrested. If somebody was openly trans, they were arrested. If they were in drag, they were arrested. If a man looked too effeminate, they would be arrested. And if there was anyone dressed in women's clothing that they couldn't tell for sure whether they were a man or a woman, then a female cop would take them to the bathroom and force them to show to pull up their dress. And if there was a penis there, that they would be arrested.
May I kill them with my time travel machine that definitely does not exist?
If you can make it work, go. Feel free, buddy. I'm not going to stop you. For the lesbians, if any woman was found in the club and they were not wearing, they specified this, if they were not wearing at least 3 articles of feminine clothing, then they would be arrested. What are you thinking about right now?
Homicide.
Yeah, that's completely fair. That is I think that's a perfectly rational reaction to this state of affair. After that, they would check on the bar, and if the bar didn't have a liquor license, then all of the alcohol would be seized and the employees would be arrested. Then after that, the police would shut down the bar. They'd put up a sign that said that the bar was closed. And then they would leave. And then usually for most raids, what would happen after that is they'd bring in some backup employees. They'd take the sign down, and then they'd pull out all of their hidden booze and bring it back out so they could finish out the night. That's usually how these raids went. This raid did not go that smoothly, because when several trans patrons and drag queens were told to accompany the female officers to the bathroom, they refused. When several men refused to present their IDs, the police started getting upset. When you know what happens when cops get frustrated, they gotta throw their weight around. They gotta prove that they're the big tough manly men. And so during this process, they decided that they needed to pat some of the lesbian patrons down and frisk them. And while they were doing that, they just groped them, just out in front of everybody. Just started groping them. And so everybody in the building was progressively becoming angrier and angrier and angrier. The cops realized that, this is a lot of very angry people. So they started trying to defuse the situation by, they went ahead and just decided they were going to release anybody that wasn't openly cross-dressing. But then after those people were escorted out the front door, they didn't go back home. They just hung out front and kept verbally harassing the cops.
As they should.
And then as the cops started to bring some of the confiscated liquor outside to load up into their wagons, they started getting pelted with pennies. And by this point, the crowd outside, which was originally just the people that were let go, it was around 50 people that were let go from inside the bar. They were being noisy enough. They were starting to attract attention from everybody else on Christopher Street, which was a lot of people, a lot a lot of because there were a lot of bars and a lot of apartments, and most everybody who lived there was gay. So they just started piling out, seeing what was happening, joining the crowd. And so within like 10 minutes, the crowd grew from 50 to around 150. It was escalating pretty fast.
Where could they have gone wrong?
As one of as one of the cops was carrying a crate of liquor outside, a transvestite got in his way, and so he shoved her out of the way, just kind of elbowed her out of the way, and she responded by smacking him over the head with her purse. Damn right, yeah. And in response, she was repeatedly beaten over the head with a nightstick, which didn't help diffuse the situation, if you can believe it. And so the crowd was starting to, like, they were throwing pennies before. Now they started throwing bigger stuff, like small pebbles they were finding on the ground, or if a lot of them had like beer bottles they had brought out with them. They started throwing those, beer cans, things like that. Just whatever, like, relatively light stuff they could find kind of sitting around or on the ground. And so the cops started kind of trying to form a cordon around against the crowd around the entrance so that they could start bringing arrested people out. And one of the people that they brought out arrested was a lesbian who was described both by eyewitnesses and in newspapers as, quote unquote, a classic New York butch.
Fuck yes.
And fuck yes, yeah. Yeah, and boy oh boy was she giving the cops hell.
As is our God-given fucking right.
As is her God-given right. She was smacking the shit out of cops, like just full on punching them in her handcuffs and then running away to escape. And then they catch her again. She'd just violently shake to try and get out of their grasp, would escape again, try to run away, get caught again. This happened over and over again for like 10 minutes.
That's something really fucking cool now, isn't it?
Yeah, that's really fucking cool. And the whole crowd is like having they're like cheering her on. They're like they're like, yeah, fuck yeah, go get them. And then all of the 5 or 6 cops that were like holding her, trying to arrest her, they pull out their batons and they start beating her, like viciously beating her.
I'm holding off until you finish this part of the story for the shot, but sip for the cops.
And so they were beating this woman in front of the crowd.
Also, go ahead and take 3 sips because of the fucky shit the mob did with the bars.
Oh, yeah.
It kind of went over my head, and I'm kind of being pedantic asshole, but I don't need an excuse to make us drunk.
No, you take any opportunity you can. I believe in you.
Also, with our new setup, I think this is definitely going to help with keeping us straight on the rules.
Yeah, and so as they are beating this woman, she looks up at the crowd, makes eye contact with them, and she shouts, "Why don't you guys do something?"
Fuck, that... Okay, I'm going to call 2 shots on that, because getting away from the cops is cool as fuck. Oh my god. Essentially doing, what the fuck is wrong with you guys?
Okay, the coolest part is, the moment she said that, the moment that the last syllable came out of her mouth is the exact moment the riot started.
Like I said, that's 2 shots for this. I still want you to finish the story before we get into the shots, just because this is...
No, we could go ahead. That's...
First shot, then you'll finish, and then we'll do the second.
No, because after this, we're just getting into the meat of it.
Oh, shit. Hell yes! So,
yeah. Up next is the cool shit, so let's get this going.
Okay, so there was the getting away from the cops, and there's the basically literally saying the words that immediately start the riot. 2 shots, so cheers.
Well, hold on. Reread the rules real quick. Because Marsha hasn't entered into the story yet.
I thought you said that was Marsha.
No, that was just a lesbian.
That she was... Fuck. Sorry. I already took the shot. Fuck it.
There, I'll take a shot with you.
That was cool as fuck. I'm not gonna lie. I thought that was Marsha.
Actually, we don't know who that was. Her name's been lost to history.
Holy shit. She is the most badass person in the story so far.
Oh, wait till we get to Marsha.
Oh, God.
At one point, once we get to Marsha, at one point she leads, like, imagine, like, the scene of, like, the charge of the Knights of Gondor at the Battle of Helm's Deep.
I've never seen
Lord of the Rings
or The Hobbit.
Okay. But so at some point, look up the scene of the charge of the Knights of Rohan at the Battle of Helm's Deep, and then imagine that's all trans people, and then at the head of that charge is Marsha P. Johnson, and that's an actual scene we're about to get.
Fuck.
She's so fucking cool, man. So yeah, so this woman, as she's being beaten by like 6 cops, she looks up to the crowd and she just screams, "Why don't you guys do something?" And that was the spark.
That was the flame. That was the flaming arrow that just lit the pyre.
We're rolling up our sleeves. We're getting into the beat of this. This is where she gets a little squirrely. Okay.
Oh, fuck. If it gets worse, if you're talking like that, God. Whoo.
Once she says this, all hell breaks loose. And the crowd rushes forward against the line of cops. And they just start wailing on them.
Fuck them cops.
With anything they've got. They target the cops. They target the cop cars. The paddy wagon gets tipped over. All of the cop cars get their tires slashed. Any of the cops that are in the cop cars as the tires are getting slashed, they immediately beeline it out of there. They are out. And keep in mind, by this point, the crowd had grown to 600 people against around 30 or 40 cops. The police began fighting back. They started beating the crowd back with batons, and they started making some arrests. Interestingly, one of the first people that were arrested during the riot was this guy named Dave Van Ronk, who was a folk singer who wasn't actually gay. He was completely straight.
The fuck?
Yeah, he had come out and joined the crowd because he was at a bar down the street, and he had heard the commotion, and he came out and he decided to join the crowd because he would take any opportunity to fight cops he could possibly get. It did not matter. This guy was also the mentor to Bob Dylan.
Hell yes. That makes Bob Dylan just a smidge cooler in my head.
I'm not going to lie. I kind of like Phil Oakes better than Bob Dylan, but that's neither here nor there.
I didn't say I was a fan of him. I just said it makes him a smidge cooler.
So yeah. Van Ronk was actually the first arrest made after the violence broke out. So I think that's pretty cool. And then famously, like one of the major sort of symbols of the Stonewall riot came out of this moment right here. After a few people in the crowd were beaten by the cops, they broke off and they started to run away. But they accidentally ran right into a construction site where they saw something that reinvigorated their will to fight the cops.
It incited their rage?
It incited their rage because, well, it restored their morale because they found some very effective weapons they could use, which was a big old pile of bricks.
Fuck yes!
And so they come walking back down the street with just handfuls full of bricks and start passing them out.
You don't know how much you're like, I'm fucking like a child on Christmas the more you're telling the story.
Yeah. And so to this day, there is a tradition where during Pride Month, there's a tradition that you paint a brick, like however you want, just an expression of like your pride as part of like your celebration of Pride Month, and you'll paint a brick, and that's where this comes from. because they threw so many bricks that day. So in response to the fact that there was a spontaneous thunderstorm of bricks coming towards them, they decide that their position is no longer tenable, and so they rush inside. They rush inside the building, and they barricade themselves in the building. They barricade all the doors.
Cowards!
Cowards, yes. Yeah, so in response to finding out that the doors were now locked and barricaded, a group got together, a few trans people, and a group of like the local homeless gay kids. They got together and they all together tore a parking meter out of the sidewalk.
Fucking yes!
And then they began swinging it like a bat to break down the front door.
I goddamn love these kids. I can drink to that, brother.
Oh, this is one of my favorite parts. So you know how cops still have to use fire hoses to...
Yeah, I remember specifically learning about it during the civil rights era, where they would like use fire trucks and fire hoses to like disperse crowds and such during that era.
The Stonewall Inn actually had a fire hose in there that could be used in the event of a fire. And so the cops, falling back on their natural instincts to anytime they see a civil rights protester, they got to blast them with a hose, tried to pull out this hose and use it like through the windows to try and like push back some of the protesters. But when they turned it on, it was just a slow trickle coming out. But yeah, so when they tried to use the hose, it came out as a slow trickle because the cops had been bribed to not enforce any of the building code. And so there was no running water in the building.
I fucking love it, Derek. I like this story. Oh, this is perfect. I love you for picking Stonewall this year.
It's the gift that keeps on giving. So the cops just kind of hunkered down in sheer terror for about 45 minutes until the crowd finally beats down the door and rushes in. And to the credit of the crowd, they do not immediately tear the cops apart. They just kind of come up and they start throwing shit at the cops who are kind of cowering behind the bar. And to the cops' credit, what little I can give them, they do have their pistol drawn, but do not immediately open fire. Eventually it gets, like, there's kind of a standoff within the building, and eventually, like, a few punches start getting thrown. The cops and the rioters start kind of fighting. And at some point in the confusion, somebody sets a fire. And the interior of the building starts to catch. And it's around that time, the cops are, like, this close to opening fire. They hear police sirens outside.
If Stonewall happened today, how fast the bullets would have flown is scary.
Oh, yeah, they wouldn't have made it this far. There would already be like 10 dead people.
There would have been no barricade. The girl who kept the butch lesbian who kept getting away would have been shot like the third time she got away.
Yeah,
which is actually illegal because they've done Supreme Court rulings on that and said you cannot shoot them if they are not violently retreating. But guess what? They wouldn't have been charged.
If this had happened today, keep in mind a good large portion of the patrons at Stonewall were black. There's a good chance they might have started opening fire while they were starting the raid.
There's not a good possibility. There would have been shots fired.
Yeah, if Stonewall had happened today, 10 minutes in, there had already been like 12 fatalities.
I hate being so pessimistic. There's no way this doesn't go bad.
So, police reinforcements arrive. They hear the sirens outside. Everybody, the part of the crowd that's in the building, rushes out when they hear they're coming around. And the cops that have arrived are part of the NYPD Tactical Force Patrol, which is basically like riot cops, Like they're like the special riot squad.
They're SWAT.
No, SWAT is SWAT. No, SWAT didn't actually exist at this point yet. They're.
I mean, it would be allegorically like the closest, like, because I've only ever really seen like SWAT respond to like really crazy shit or like riots in media.
No, SWAT doesn't really respond to riots. They more respond to stuff like hostage situation or especially dangerous warrants, things like that. But this would be more like a dedicated like riot gear squad, like the guys that dress up in all of the body armor with the riot shields and the batons and form like the phalanx. Yeah. So the tactical patrol force of the New York Police Department, they show up. They form like a shield wall, and they start to process down the street, kind of just beating any of the rioters that they come across. And they start arresting people,
showing their true pig colors.
Eyewitnesses said that the rioters who fought their own arrest the hardest were the transvestites. They were the most vicious. They were the ones that were throwing punches and biting and shit. Which, of course, they are, because a lot of them, for a lot of trans people back then, getting arrested was a death sentence. You're gonna be beaten in your cell. And that wasn't. They knew what they were being dragged off to. As these riot cops started advancing down the street, this is a really famous scene from the riot. A crowd formed. Part of the crowd formed up and like locked arms around each other in front of the riot line as they were processing forward, and they formed like a kick line. So like the line of people like holding like arms around each other's shoulders, and they start like kicking back and forth, like, and singing a song. They start like a dance team routine. You know what I'm talking about?
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, they form one of those, and they start singing songs, kind of making fun of the cops. And it was around that time that who I like to refer to as the main character of Stonewall. If this were made into a movie, this woman would be the main character. Marsha P. Johnson arrived on the scene. So Marsha shows up, and Marsha was, in her own right, by this point, a legendary black drag queen. Had also become like a pretty prominent figure in like gay rights and queer rights activism in Greenwich Village by this point. She was kind of the one of the de facto leaders of like activist organizing in the gay community in Greenwich Village at this point. And as soon as she arrived, it's like she just invigorated the whole crowd. The whole crowd went crazy. And
so she gave them their second, or probably like third or fourth wind at that point.
Yeah, she rallies them, because at this point they're starting to get demoralized. The cavalry has arrived. They're kind of getting broken up. She rallies them for one last big charge against the riot line. And she is right up at the front, leads this group right in to just attack the riot cops, and they just start beating the shit out of these guys.
Fuck them.
Yeah, fuck them.
As far as I'm concerned, they don't deserve to live.
Yeah, you want to do a shot for that?
The cops. Yeah, that's a shot. Pride.
So they get one last good strike in against the cops, but eventually the crowd did break, and the rest of that early morning consisted of small groups of rioters being chased through the streets and arrested. And by 4 a.m., the street had been completely cleared of rioters. And then you got the second night of rioting. There's not a whole lot to say about the second night of rioting. I'll give you a few of the highlights, though. Early in the evening, hundreds of... okay, so here's a weird thing. First of all, I gotta say this. The Stonewall Inn was pretty heavily damaged by the fire from the rioting the night before. It was open for business by the following night.
The kind of like clientele they served, they probably couldn't have survived without doing that.
Well, they probably could.
Plus, they probably would have gotten extra patronage that night because, like, hey, we just got raided. We're going to need to do repairs. Come on, guys. Come and visit us.
Yeah, and so keep in mind as I'm describing all of this, as the second night of rioting is going on, the Stonewall Inn is actively serving people alcohol while there's a riot going on the outside. Yeah, and so there's some people that are kind of just like standing like up on the second floor of Stonewall, just kind of looking down on the street and cheering on as they're like fighting cops and stuff.
That would be beautiful. Just you're getting drunk and you're like, there's an anti-law enforcement thing going on outside, and you're just like, yeah, this is getting my proverbial rocks off. Not literally, but like, this is a cathartic rocks off kind of thing. Just watching that.
This time, the riot wasn't so much like a spontaneous act of mob violence against a police raid. This time, it took on more of the appearance of like a street festival, if that makes sense.
Fuck yes. Like where Pride's kind of developed today.
Yeah, so people just kind of came out into the streets and they started basically letting out all of like their pent up emotion.
Rage.
It was rage, but it was also like joy and happiness. Like they were singing songs, they were dancing, they were openly like kissing and hugging and like just being themselves out in public. They didn't have to do it behind
closed doors because they said fuck them.
In a dark, shitty bar. They could do it out in the open without shame and without fear. They felt empowered for the first time ever to be able to do that safely. Or not even just safely, just like at all.
I don't give a fuck anymore.
Yeah, they don't give a shit. Because what are they going to do? They're going to beat us? They're going to... Are the cops going to come and beat us for doing this? They were going to do that anyways. So we might as well do it out in public and show them that they can't control us anymore. And so people were out in the streets. They were singing, they were dancing, they were drinking. They started like pouring trash out onto the street and lighting it to make bonfires. And all the while, the riot cops were just harassing anybody they got their hands on. They were coming. They started beating people, and they just kept partying.
They decided not to let the cops win because fuck those cops.
Yeah, fuck those cops.
I hope every one of them suffered a miserable life after that, every one of the cops, and I hope they're rotting, if there is hell, in hell.
Eyewitness...
Like, I don't like to... I know we make jokes about all cops are bastards, blah, 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 one bad apple rots them all that bullshit, but, like, every cop that was involved in Stonewall actually deserves to rot in hell, because they are genuinely horrible people. I don't like grouping people up like that normally, but, like, fuck.
Yeah, like actually evil. Like
actually do not deserve to have lived.
Honestly, you can look at the entire history of the New York Police Department and use that as like justify like a philosophical argument that we know that objective good and evil exists because we know for a fact these people are objectively evil.
I've heard some stories about specifically New York law enforcement, and it very much makes me want to lean into the group them all together. I know that's bad. I don't like doing that in general. Like, I will say stuff that seems to say I support that, but I genuinely normally don't. But oh my god.
Here, this should cheer you up though. Eyewitness say that they saw... So Marsha's back. Marsha came back for the second night of rioting.
Fuck yes!
She climbed up a light pole and, like, you know, kind of like cheering on the crowd, inspiring everybody. Everybody's having a good time. And she climbed up the light pole with a heavy bag, like a duffel bag full of something heavy. And threw it down from the top of the light pole onto the windshield of a cop car. It just shattered the windshield.
Fuck yes! Shots! Pride.
So, basically, in the broad strokes, what we can say about the second night of rioting is this was the first time that both gay and straight people, a lot of the people in New York City, both gay and straight, this was the first time ever in their lives during this riot that they ever saw gay people showing affection, like men showing affection to men in public. And that was probably the biggest, like, takeaway from this whole situation, was that for the first time, these men did not feel afraid to be who they were in public. And it took an act of violence to be able to reclaim that sense of power to be able to do that. And that was really, that had an incredibly powerful, lasting cultural impact, not just on New York City, but on the entire country, that we're still feeling today. Just that moment is, like, we're still feeling the effects of it today. Because before, you can kind of divide gay rights in America, as a lot of people do anyways. It's kind of up for debate, but in general, you can kind of divide it into pre-Stonewall and post-Stonewall. Pre-Stonewall, you had the guys like the Mattachine Society, who advocated, like, let's be real quiet, let's take this glacially slow, and eventually we'll be able to worm our way into like, well-to-do society. And then you get Stonewall, and after that, it's like, we're going to be as gay as possible in public, nonstop, until these people are forced to just fucking live with us.
Fuck them!
And fuck them! Good!
You shouldn't have to hide who you are as a fundamental person like that. And it's always bothered me that people push it to that extreme, like the pearl clutchers is what I mean specifically. And I hate people having to be so repressed that they're not themselves, especially when it's not something bad. Like, if you are someone who, like, I think we talked about this. I don't know if it made the episode. I will cut it if it didn't. The non-offending people who have minor attractive things where, like, they start seeking help, or like, I am fucked up in the head. I don't want to be a pedophile kind of person, like, where they haven't hurt someone else. It's not like that when you're, like, gay. That's not what pride or what homosexuality is. So they shouldn't have to do stuff like that. They shouldn't have to hold them back. It's not like they're like the borderline serial killer who's holding themselves back from crossing that line. No, they're just human beings who love who they love. Fuck what other people think. It's not like that.
Yeah, and I don't think I've really, like, made it super clear, like, just what exactly gay people were going through during this time. Not that I have to explain it for the gay people but I want to get really specific, because, like, a lot of gay people, if you were lucky, you could stay in the closet, you could live a full life as, like, a loner, and you could be accepted in general society. Just sort of the oddity, he's not really married or anything like that. Or sometimes you are married to somebody that you're not really, like, attracted to.
I'm going to quickly interrupt you. It's the intangible, they were roommates, where, like, no one actually knew you were lovers, but, like, if you looked underneath the surface, they knew, if they actually cared to know you.
Yeah, that was best case scenario. More likely, if you were living, like, a stable life as a gay person, you were either completely alone, or you were married to somebody that you didn't actually love in order to keep up the appearance.
That's one of the saddest things I've ever, like, thought about in my life, is the people who had the false marriages. And I'm not talking the ones where, like, hey, this benefits everyone. I know you're, like, you're gay. This is for our parents, this, that, and the other. Not those, because those are actually kind of okay. I don't think you should have to do that, but, like, I understand, like, the real sad part, what I'm getting at is, like, you're in a marriage and your partner doesn't know, they don't actually satisfy you in that way. Like, you're not in love. You're not having that emotional connection that I see as part of marriage.
And those are the best case scenario. For most gay people, your life was pretty much relegated to, in a lot of cases, homelessness, usually joblessness. If you were ever to express yourself in public, you were ostracized at best, beaten by cops at worst.
Taking your life at worst.
Yeah, and in the worst possible case scenario, which happened shockingly often.
No, not really shockingly, knowing our propensity for violence as Americans.
It's not shocking that it happened. It's shocking that just the sheer scale of it. But it happened so often that either they would take their own lives just out of loneliness or out of just sheer misery, or they would be murdered. They would be murdered by cops. They would be murdered by bigots who just see them out on the street. They'd be murdered by family members who were ashamed of them. This is the life.
I will, that's one thing I want to add to this, especially the pearl clutchers, specifically our most vocal lawmakers. Gay is an abomination, blah, 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 blah. They're really just so far closeted, because you know how many people who have advocated against homosexuality come out, oh, they hired an underage homosexual hooker or this, that, and the other. And it just, it does something to me. I have so much rage against certain things that happen with our society that I actively try not to think about because of how angry it makes me. And this episode, in a good way, reminds me about how angry I get over this stuff, just because it shouldn't matter. Love who you love. At the end of the day, it doesn't fucking matter.
And that's why Stonewall is so important. That's why Stonewall was such a huge turning point, because this is when all of that pent up
rage and aggression
and sorrow and loss and just a desire
kind of accumulated
that have accumulated for so long, and just the desire to be able to love themselves and to be able to love
openly
whoever they want. That is when this all exploded. Stonewall is when it blew up. And they just let it all go because they didn't have anything else to lose.
Yeah, it's I am one of those people where I don't want to say I want to brag, but I don't like hiding my relationship. And it's just not being able to say I love this person or this person is mine, not in a bragging way, but maybe a little bit bragging, the id or the unconscious part. Yeah, probably a little, whatever. But just being able to say I am not alone. This person is with me throughout it. I can scream to the top of the world, they are mine, not because I own them, because I am enough. I am deserving of this person. And for that part to be funnily repressed by an entire group, an entire sexual orientation of people, because of what society might do to them, I can't imagine what that would do to someone.
Because expressing love is just a basic part of what makes us human. And that is to forcefully take that away from a human being is in a lot of ways a fate worse than death. To take away a person's ability to love and to express their love.
I wouldn't say they're taking away the ability to love. Yes, they're making it socially unacceptable to love. And at certain times, yes, maybe they can't love, but it's the more the expression of the love, I think, is what makes it worse, because loving someone is also to say, hey, I'm in this together. I want everyone to know they are with me. Everyone knows I am not alone. It's not it's announcing to the world that we are in this together, not in a braggadocious way, but in a way that says, hey, you know I'm not alone. You can't judge me. You know I have this partner. I know I can rely on them, and you know I can rely on them, so I don't have to have that conversation where you're trying to tell me, oh, you need this person, you need that. But the amount of our society that tells us, yes, you have to have a partner, and if you don't have a partner I know about, because you had to hide that partner because it wasn't socially acceptable at the time, just sits there and weighs on your consciousness.
And I think that forcing somebody, because that's effectively what was happening, is they were forcing gay people to choose between either you're allowed to openly love who it is that you love, or you get to have a stable life. You don't get to have both. That is what this system, that's the choice that this system gave to these people. I think in practice that is controlling who, that is saying you're not allowed to love these people. And if you do love these people, if you do love that way, then we will make your life a living hell. That is dictating who you're allowed to love. And that's why Stonewall is so inspiring, is they fought back. They fought.
It's because we have to be in their face about it. To love who you love without the bigots, without the pearl clutchers, even though they're still around, you have to say, I don't give a fuck about what you think. I will fight for who I love. Because you have to fight for who you love. Not just in this sense, but like, love isn't just perfect. It's not that fairy tale thing that you think it is. You have to work on it day by day. And not being able to be open about that just fundamentally hinders something in that relationship. Not in like a way between you two, but just it weighs on your psyche not being able to be open about that. That fucks with you on a fundamental level.
And that's why Stonewall is so inspiring to me, is because it is the idea and the expression of love that is then weaponized into an act of self-defense. And that is so incredibly inspiring to me.
It is. Like, I mentioned multiple times throughout this how rageful I get. Because I can't imagine a world where the person I love, the person I want to spend the rest of my life with, or the person like in the moment, like I get you're not going to be able to see the future, but like the person you're fixated on that point, whether it's healthy or not, being able to tell the world they are with me, they are mine, not in like an onerous way, but being like, look at what I have achieved, look at what I have, don't look down on me, I'm not this lonely sad. It's part of what our society has said. Like, yes, I know it's probably not healthy the way our society's conditioned us on relationships, but like, because there are aromantic people, there are asexual people out there, obviously, but we've put a focus on having that person, your person, this person that you trust above all others, and not being able to share that, say that this is my person to the world, share that with the world.
That's evil.
Yes.
That's actual, like, biblical evil.
Especially with the focus our society puts on that. If you don't have an out and out person that everyone knows, like everyone, like your parents, your extended family, your social circles know that this is your person. And if you have to hide that, if you're not out of the closet back then, or even today, because it's still a struggle today, unfortunately. I fucking hate it. Our gay, our lesbian, our trans, our non-binary friends who aren't able to truly express themselves and be with those who they love, and then they get the extra piling on from their friends and family, like, oh, you need this person, even though like they may actually have their person, but because of the way society is structured, they can't tell them, is horrible. It's shameful because like the emphasis, like even our psyche puts on, we're social creatures. We shouldn't have to hide who we're the most social with, who we trust more than anyone else. I'll get off my soapbox now and let you finish the episode, but like,
no, but real quick, I just want to say, like, in regards to like what's happening with like trans people today, something that I thought about, like, as I was researching for this episode, learning about Stonewall, something that gave me so much hope for like what's for trans people today, is just the sheer fact that the greatest weapon that they have to defend themselves the greatest weapon that they have to defend themselves is just being themselves in public. It's just being themselves. And all of the trans people that I've known.
Desensitization, basically?
Well, just like all of the trans people that I've ever known are completely unapologetic about it.
Shout out to our homie Tay.
Tay, you fucking rock. I love you so much. There are a couple quotes that I want to end with. Or not end with, but like before we continue. We're almost done, but before we continue, there are a couple quotes that I want to give first. The first is, I can't even remember where I heard it, but it's been very meaningful to me ever since I did hear it. and it's something along the lines of keep that rage alive. If you're angry, keep it alive, because if you're angry, it means you have hope. Always be angry, because it means you still have hope.
Yes. I'll go ahead and add my own favorite quote, because I think taking that mindset is applicable here, even if the direct quote isn't. And it's one of my favorite quotes, and I know it's not taking it. It's one of the ... quotes where like you're kind of like conjoining two different parts and like kind of taking a little bit out of context. It's also one of my favorite books, Stephen King, The Stand. The place where you made your stand never mattered ... only that you were still there and still on your feet. It doesn't matter what social, political issue you're taking your stance on, as long as you are in, quote unquote, the right, as long as you are actually like in support of humans and people being able to be their genuine selves, and you're standing on business like that, it doesn't matter what topic what your stance is on that thing. It doesn't matter what your nuance is, as long as you're standing up for that.
Every act of defiance is an act in the name of humanity.
Yes, exactly. Continue, sir.
So yeah, I wanted to finish that second quote that I actually had in the script. So yeah, there's this guy named Allen Ginsberg who was a beat poet, and he was gay, and he had moved into Greenwich Village in order to join like the artistic scene there. And he had actually gone to the Stonewall Inn for the very first time during the night of the second night of rioting. And after the fact, he said, this is a quote that he gave about the second night of rioting. Quote, "You know, the guys there were so beautiful. They've lost that wounded look that fags all had 10 years ago." And I think that really encompasses what was so important about Stonewall, was that they weren't wounded anymore. They were happy. They were just happy to be there and be who they were.
They were tired of hiding it at that point. They were out, like, from what I understand about Stonewall, that was the point where, like, no, fuck you. I'm tired of pretending I'm not the person I am. I don't care if you pursue me. Like, that was the point where, like, the LGBTQ plus community at that time decided, I'm tired of being in the closet. Like, yes, excuse me. A lot of people were still in the closet, but, like, the community as a whole was like, no, I'm not going to hide in the corner. I'm not going to be in the closet, like, as a group. Fuck you.
So, yeah, let's get through the aftermath, and let's kind of finish off, this whole story real quick. So, the Stonewall riots are what really pushed the gay rights issue into the public consciousness. Previously, before that, gay activism had been limited to very quiet, very conservative demonstrations that didn't attract very much attention. It was a slow, incremental strategy pushed by homophile groups like the Mattachine Society. But within months of Stonewall happening, numerous groups were being formed with names like the Gay Liberation Front and Gay Activists Alliance. And they popped up advocating for gay rights by adopting tactics from like the anti-war movement, the Black Power movement, other parts of the New Left. Gay activism was now out in the open, and it was unapologetically militant.
As they have to, as they deserve to be.
Yeah, they absolutely deserve to be. And they were all inspired by the example at Stonewall. Easily the most enduring legacy of the Stonewall riots was pride. On the first anniversary of the riot, gay activists held a march on Christopher Street, where the Stonewall Inn was, in order to commemorate the event, which they called the Christopher Street Liberation Day. At the same time, marches were held in Chicago and Los Angeles under the title of gay pride marches. And those were the first pride marches. The following year, other cities joined in, including Boston, Dallas, Milwaukee, London, Paris, West Berlin, and Stockholm. But that first march at Christopher Street was absolutely the biggest of that early period of Pride. The march in 1970, it started at Christopher Street in front of the Stonewall Inn, and the procession took up. It was a procession from Christopher Street all the way up to Central Park, and some observers said that the procession, like the whole group of people, the march itself was a total of 51 blocks of marching. The group of people that were out there in the march itself was 15 blocks at any given time, filled with people from sidewalk to sidewalk. Thousands of people in 1970. That was by far and away the largest demonstration for gay rights ever at that point.
It sounds like it. Like, Jesus, like, I am like the amount of rage this story has filled me with. Yes, I know it's past. I know, like, that people were treated with that misinjustice. Like, I am struggling not to, like, you know, that scene you see in movies where, like, someone's, like, so angry they destroy a glass. Like, I am actively, even though I'm actually pretty far gone from an episode, I'm on beer 4 minimum. Not just, like, holding this glass and destroying it in my hand and cutting myself. Like, I obviously have the strength. Like, we've seen me do some stupid shit that's, like, Herculean feats of strength compared to, like, my level of, like, in the gymnast. But, like, also it's a glass. It's glass. It doesn't take that much strength, but still.
So this first Pride March was so big that it really demonstrated to the world that not only
we're here, we're queer, and we won't be hid.
Exactly, yeah, actually. Not only that gay people were here and they were out and they were here to stay, but also there were a lot of them. They were everywhere. And they weren't, that it's not something you could sweep, you couldn't sweep them under the rug. They were a part, like an intrinsic part of the fabric of society. You couldn't take them away anymore. And
there was no repressing it anymore. It was like, fuck you, I'm not gonna hide anymore.
Yeah. It's too big. Yeah, it's too big now. You can't sweep it under the rug anymore. It's grown outside of their control.
As the ones who like to control the media, the pearl clutchers, hate when someone who is suppressed, like our LGBTQ plus community, especially today on our trans friends, they hate when that happens. Like, and they like to use the media today, like, oh, cognitive bias, like, whatever. But, like, it just has to get to the point where, like, even the people who are sticking their heads in the sand can't stick their heads in the sand anymore. Like, it's forcing the dirt level in the sand so far up that they can't even, like, bury their head anymore. Is the best analogy I have.
Yeah, that's why they're attacking trans people so hard nowadays, is because they can't pretend they don't exist anymore. Which is good. It's not good that they're being attacked, but it is good that they're...
It's good that they can't hide the fact that trans people exist anymore. Because fuck the people who deny our trans friends exist. I love Tay. I consider every person in that group chat family at this point. And I would die. I would lay down my life for any one of them.
So, to put it in another perspective, in early 1969, before the riot, there were around 50 active gay rights groups around the country. By 1971, there were over 1,500.
Hell yes, brother.
And they were all way more militant than they had been just 2 years before.
Hell yes.
To finish this off real quick, I need to bring up that Stonewall was, of course, a huge turning point for trans rights as well. As I mentioned, many of the main instigators of the riot were drag queens and transvestites, with early gender non-conforming people before transgender became like a generally accepted concept.
It was before like the idea that we modernly have of being able to transition your gender occurred, so they weren't able to articulate that they were not the gender assigned at birth. Yes, we have had transgender people throughout the history of the world, but like as a whole, there wasn't no unifying force to be able to banner under. Like, yes, we've had. Also, at one point, I want to talk about that one. There's a historical figure, and I don't remember enough, but it was some transgender male that ended up in some noble's court and made it super high, and no one knew they were trans. It was. I will have to look at this when I'm sober and get you the information to be able to find this, because I want to cover that historical figure really bad, even outside of a Pride Month. But like the amount of stuff they accomplished in their life is just, without them the world knowing they were trans, is insane. And I don't know if this is one of those like internet things where they're not real. It could be they're not real, but like if they are an actual person, oh my god, the things they accomplished. If you can finish this out, Derek.
So that person I mentioned before, Marsha P. Johnson, she would later go on to found one of the most influential trans rights organizations in history.
As she damn well deserves to have done. Like, this woman is an inspiration.
Yeah, it was a group called, bear with me, it's a bit of a name, Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, or STAR for short. Yeah, STAR works. The full name, bit clunky, but STAR works.
Yeah, there's plenty of like organization names that are clunky unless you use the acronym. But like, fuck it. Like, that happens to everyone.
For decades, trans people would both fight alongside gay rights groups for liberation and also against gay rights groups, because as a lot of gay rights groups became more mainstream, a lot of them sought to kind of distance themselves from drag queens and trans people.
That is one of the, I know this has happened throughout history, but that's one of the most upsetting things through the gay rights movement is the distancing themselves from the trans movement, because like everyone deserves to love how they love. They deserve to be observed in the way they observe themselves in their head. I know it's not going to be a one-to-one perfect, but like, hey, I believe I'm he, him, even though I was assigned AFAB at birth. It's another source of rage, and I'll stop here, but like, you should be able to identify with the pronouns you want to be.
Yeah, this is still happening today. Notably, one of the main anti-trans groups in the United Kingdom, specifically, is called the LGB Alliance. Just as a little hint at what their actual purpose is. Most of their main donors are most of the big like high money donors to the LGB Alliance are Tories and they're conservatives who hate gay people too. It's a little suggestion as to what's actually going on there. Yeah, so but groups like STAR and other groups like the Queen's Liberation Front, and including a lot of people who were actually at Stonewall, were fighting for the rest of their lives just to keep their role in the riot from being erased from gay history.
That is so fucked that, like, I don't think like, everyone thinks I'm the General Green Giant, blah, 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 like, everyone thinks me as this, like, peaceful guy, like, oh, Tim doesn't have rage, or even when he does, it's nothing, it's blah, 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 blah. I actually have a level of like rage that's always suppressed, not like in a bad way, just like I know I'm not going to be constructive when I'm at that level. Like I generally keep it down because like I am not going to be productive. I'm not going to help myself. I'm not going to help others at that point. After this episode ends, like tomorrow, whether I have the money or not, I probably need to go to Rage Room because like I need to vent this like anger out. Like this, what happened to our LGBTQ plus community at this time? Like even in my inebriated state, like I cannot express the level of rage I have even like at all. Even though I'm not showing it, like yes, I'm drunk. It's easier to ignore that. Like I am at levels of rage over like how our brothers and sisters were treated at that point in time. Like I'm gonna shut up because I literally can't express it. Continue.
But yeah, luckily the LGBT community at large has embraced the role of trans people at Stonewall. But as we both know, the fight for trans rights today is still an uphill battle.
And that breaks my goddamn heart.
For what it's worth, I have a lot more hope for it after reading about Stonewall than I did before.
Me too, because it takes one reactionary event to change the course of history. And I have faith we'll get there.
So yeah, that's what I have.
I have constantly expressed my rage throughout this. And like I think I've been a little bit more vocal than I have throughout the episodes on like how I'm feeling. So I don't have any notes here at the end. Derek, do you?
No, just stay angry. Don't let them shame you out of your anger, because as long as you're angry, you have hope and you have motivation.
But control your anger. Don't lash out at the others who don't deserve it. Use your anger as a guiding force is all I will say. Like as someone who grew up with someone who didn't control their anger in the best manner. My father is an alcoholic, bipolar person. I love him. He was not the best, but he gave me the best he could, given like the way coping mechanisms that society gave him. As someone who struggles to effectively control their emotions in a healthy manner, because I admit that I am one of those people. Just take it, even if you're rageful, don't let it go, but like take a step back and think how you can channel that rage. I like to say I like to be petty, and it's probably just the way I channel my rage. Like use it in a manner that one benefits you, but disenfranchises or inconveniences at the bare minimum those who would not care if you vanish from the face of the earth, even if they don't know as you an individual counts as that part of the group. Even if you haven't told them like, hey, I'm LGBTQ plus, if they knew you had that label, they wouldn't care if you died at that moment. Like use your rage to inconvenience them in manners, even if it's not related to your orientation. Use it in ways that even if at the end of the day they won't know it was because of that, you will still know. And you knew you fought back. And if something like this happens again, don't be scared to change history. Don't be scared to be in that moment and say, no, fuck you, this is enough. Use that rage.
If somebody says that you don't deserve to exist, then never stop reminding them that you do.
And if that takes ending their life, I'm not against it. Do I think there should be a little bit of steps before you just jump to that? Yes, because like society has conditioned us against ending a life. And I am like, we've talked about this before. I don't know if it ended up in the episode or not. Both me and you are very much against the death penalty. Like just because, not because we don't think certain people deserve to have their lives ended, but because knowing if that person committed the thing we think they deserve it for is correct, or our system has gotten that correct, is something like that. But like at a certain point, if a group of people is deciding you don't deserve to have your rights, or you don't deserve to love openly or whatever, you write however you can and whatever happens. Don't worry about oh, I couldn't. I got to stop here because lives might be lost. No, express your rage how you have to make that change. I'm not saying kill people. I am not. Like, I don't think even the U.S. government has the right to kill the people they kill. Because at the end of the day, some of the people who are convicted and sentenced to our death row are sketchy at best. I get percentages or like whatever they are. But like I've seen some people that I 100% do not believe to be sentenced the way they were, whether it's death penalty, life sentence. Like if you just look at our system and you look at the facts of the case, there's no way you could have came to the conclusion that the jury did if you were being realistic and you're not getting lost in your feelings. And I get everyone gets lost in the feelings. We are not perfect beings. We are susceptible to rage. But that's exactly why you should. Because we need to keep balance from the people who are over-moralizing things. Hold on to your rage because at the end of the day, that's all we will have unless if we let them win, that's all we have. And if we don't, they win anyway. I am drunk. What are your final words before we sign off, Derek?
Go ahead and plug my shit. You can find me at Visigoth. The first I is a 1, the O is a 0. You can find me on Blue Sky at Visigoth. The first I is an I, the O is a 0. Tim, where can they find the good stuff?
So they can find me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Tim, aka Otis. And they can find the podcast at the Alexander Society's Pod, both on Facebook and Instagram. And then Twitter and Blue Sky, Alex Society Pod. And on TikTok at Alexander Society, where this week alone, which I'm going to have more time than normal, this episode is not going up for about 2 weeks since the recording, but I am going to be nagging Derek about our beer reviews because I'm certain every beer he drank tonight he needs to review. If you have enjoyed what you've listened to today, please give us a rate and review on your streaming platform of choice, and we will see you again. And we hope everyone, whether you're out or not, has an immensely enjoyable Pride, and we will see you next time.
Bye.